Hello everyone! At this moment, we are going to tackle with you the Japanese literature. So, just sit back and relax and listen to our report. So, here's the objectives. At the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to broaden their knowledge of the basic facts and literature of Japan, identify the different works of Japanese literature, and lastly, appreciate and apply the lessons that they can get from Japanese literature. Japan, the land of rising sun. Japan is known as the land of rising sun because they say the sun rises first in Japan and then in any other part of the world. Japan is known as developed country which is famous because of its inventions, companies, and arts. Japan has one of the highest advanced technologies. No doubt that the country is fully equipped with modern amenities. That is why it has the most vending machine present in the whole world. Talking about Japan is like talking about a country which is perfect on its own. So let's proceed to the Japanese literature. Japanese literature is one of the major literatures of the world, comparable to English literature in age and variety. Japanese literature is one of the major bodies of Oriental literature. It is less voluminous than Chinese literature but comparable to Arabic, Persian, and Indian literature. It covers the period from the 5th century AD to the present. So let's proceed to the Japanese styles. Japan is a country that has a past with its styles and traditions. Yakuta is the clothing for men, and kimono is the clothing for women, and they call their sandals as zori.
Good morning, everyone. So let's go to the first novel of the Japanese literature, which is Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. So Natsume Soseki was a Japanese novelist. He is best known around the world for his novels Kokoro, Botchan, I Am a Cat, Kusamakura, and his unfinished work Light and Darkness. He was also a scholar of British literature and writer of haiku, kanji, and fairy tales from 1984 until 2004. His portrait appeared on the front of the Japanese 1,000 yen note. So this is the summary of Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. Kokoro is a story of a young man searching to fill a void in his life. It is a story of many individuals who long to appease loneliness, and the story of two men who attempt to assuage loneliness through love but only find peace in death. Soseki best friends an older man he calls sensei with expectation of learning about life. What Soseki does learn is that sensei is a troubled and reclusive man who does not trust himself or humanity enough to interact with the world. Though Soseki and sensei develop a close friendship, sensei's life remains a mystery only when sensei decides to end his life. Thus he decides it is time to pass on his testament. Kokoro is a tale that gets to the heart of the loneliness, fear, and guilt that accompanies love, individuality, and betrayal. So the main characters are the narrator. The unnamed narrator, a well-off young man from the countryside, attends university in Tokyo, youthful and earnest. He is drawn to sensei but feels alienated from his family. Second is sensei, an enigmatic man who lives a reclusive and idle life with his wife. Although he is wary of the world in general, he becomes a mentor of sorts for the narrator. He hints of his dark past but never reveals it. So enigmatic means difficult to interpret or understand. Next is the narrator's father, a pleasant and simply-minded old countryman who is suffering from kidney disease. Then, the narrator's mother, a kindly and simply-minded countrywoman. Next is Sensei's wife, which is Ojo-san, a very beautiful woman whose seemingly simply-minded nature believes her strong emotional intuition. Sensei calls her by her name, Shizu, but in the context of his story, she is called Ojo-san, which is the polite form of address for young lady or daughter. And next is the Oko-san, Ojo-san's mother. As a soldier's widow, Oko-san is the polite form of address for someone else's wife. Then last is the Kei, the motherless son of Buddhist priest. Kei is an extremely idealistic, determined, and indifferent young man who has been Sensei's friend since the two were young. Then let's go to the theme of the novel, mentorship and education. The relationship between the narrator and sensei, the central relationship in the story, is one of a student and literary teacher, though a very unconventional one at that. From the very beginning of the story, even before we, the readers, become aware of sensei's emotional depth and life experiences, the narrator names him as sensei, and so we listen attentively to what the man says, trying to understand him. In fact, the narrator himself instinctively realizes that sensei is a teacher figure, even a father figure for him, which make him impulsively call sensei. As the narrator himself says, sensei was not an obvious or good mentor in usual way, especially in comparison to the university lecturers who the narrator encountered as a student. A man who seems to live against the ideas of time by squandering his talents and idleness. Sensei gives the narrator sincere advice in life of the sort that he does not find from his other teachers or his father. Next theme is loneliness and love. Sensei tells the narrator that youth is both the loneliest time in one's life and also a time when one searches for love. In the case of the narrator, he feels loneliness due to his alienation from his family and he pursues love through his friendship with Sensei. Though the story is not concerned with the narrator's romances, if there were any, Sensei himself, when he was boarding with Okosan and Ojosan, finds in Ojosan not an intellectual equal but a vision of beauty. A beauty that is very much of the past, untainted by modernization. He hopes that he can lose his modern loneliness in this love. But ultimately, Kei will cast the shadow of modernity onto that love. So, let's go to the tone and mood of the novel. The first half of the book, from the narrator's point of view, depicts Sensei as enigmatic character with a great hidden sadness. In the second half, Sensei's tragic past is revealed. Throughout the book, significant attention is paid to the psychologies of the narrator Sensei. So this is the narrator and point of view. The entire book is written in the first person. In the first half, the narrator is a unnamed student, and in the second half, Sensei writes about his own life.
So let's proceed to the Japanese poets and their poems. First, we have Matsuo Basho. He was born in 1644 and died in 1694. So Matsuo Basho, a Japanese artist, ukiyo-e painter and printmaker of the Edo period. Hokusai is the best known for the woodblock print series, 36 Views of Mount Fuji, which include the internationally iconic print, The Great Wave of Kaganawa. Well, Matsuo Basho was the most famous poet of the Edo period in Japan. During his lifetime, Basho was recognized for his works in the collaborative haikai no renga form. So today, after centuries of commentary, he is recognized as the greatest master of haiku, then called hoku. Basho also was introduced to poetry at a young age. Although Basho is famous in the West for his hoku, he himself believed his best work lay in leading and participating in renku. He is quoted as saying, "Many of my followers can write hoku as well as I can. Where I can show who real I am is in thinking haikai verses." So let's proceed to the Japanese poem entitled The Old Pond. So this poem is of East and not from West, so it is not about the external world but about internal mind. Pond is like inside human consciousness that is still and silent. Fragments worldly things that jumps into our conscious mind and create sound means create thoughts. So the old pond. The old pond. A frog jumps in. Sound of water. So this is by Fumiko Saisho's translation. So the old pond begins with the image of the old pond. It can be somewhere in a forest or far from human habitation. Basho associates no other sound with this image. So the pond is probably at a distance, in tranquility and silence. Moreover, it is old. Being an ancient creature, it has survived the average or the ravages of time, burdened with the experience of the long years. The pond exists as a sage. The poet somehow connects himself with this pond. There is a closeness in the nature. Both are silent and at peace. Second, a frog jumps in. So this means a sudden frog breaks the tranquility of the pond. It doesn't start to croak in its usual pattern. The frog simply jumps into the pond. Why does the frog jump into the pond? One has to ask this question first before moving to the climax of this haiku. So the frog might have jumped into the pond not for breeding or laying eggs at it's not the season of monsoon. So one thing is clear that the frog does for its biological instinct. It seems as if the water of the pond rejuvenates the frog, so it jumps to the pond naturally without any biological urge or chemical upsurge inside its body. Like the frog, a person also needs solace to give time to his mind and soul. Thus, the frog jumping into the water can be symbolic reference to meditation. So let's proceed to the next. The sound of water. So the sound of water in the last line of the haiku, the sound becomes an interesting part of the imagery, right? The sound is not artificial. An external stimulus is responsible for the creation of sound. When the frog jumps into the water, it generates a short saying sound. It isn't shrill, yet it's not deep. The texture of the water sound lies somewhere in the middle. The poet's mind gets alert after hearing the sound, but it doesn't break his connection. Rather, it heightens his trains and takes him to the next level. One can think about it differently. So let's proceed to the theme of the poem. So the theme of the poem that Basho is trying to communicate to us, whenever there is peace, there always be chaos that has yet to occur. When the frog jumped in, it had a reason because the frogs are usually creatures that live in a pond. So Basho probably wants to tell us that frog was supposed to disrupt the peace that the pond has. A frog jumps in, like in the line 2, tell us that the frog, which symbolizes chaos, jumped into the body of peace, and as that happened, the sound of water shows the outcomes of it. Let's proceed to the symbolism. So first, we have pond. So the old pond symbolizes the ancient knowledge and reverence. Most scholars interpret the old pond as a symbol for the mind. So the interpretation of the pond has a hallowed vessel aligns with the influence of Zen Buddhism and nature in Basho's work. So where motifs like stillness and movement and meditation offer deeper meanings to the surface text. So the next is the frog. So what symbolizes frog? So the frog symbolizes the energy and newness of spring. When it makes a splashing sound, both the frog and the accompanying splash represent a thought causing ripples in the mind, an action mirroring the frog's body causing ripples in the pond. So the frog splash also symbolizes perception. So Basho differently perceived the frog when choosing to focus on its splash instead of its croak, and the frog itself allows Basho to perceive nature in a whole new light. Let's proceed to the tone of the poem. So the tone of the poem is the attitude you feel in it, the writer's attitude toward the subject or audience. The tone is in a poem is of praise is approval. In a satire you feel irony. So the old pond refers to a calm and peaceful place, and suddenly a frog jumps in who broke the silence and brought disturbance to the place, like what is happening now in some countries. Before they are peaceful and were contented of what they have, then suddenly colonizers or trespassers exist, which brought violence and complication of their status of life.
So let's go now to the work of Tatsushika Hokusai, which is A Poppy Blooms. I write, erase, rewrite, erase again, and then a poppy blooms. So this is short, but it has a deep meaning. Let's see. The theme. The theme of this is nature and life. The poet brings these two sides together a few simple words, equating his writing process on the way that nature works, sometimes fail, and then a beautiful poppy is brought forth into the world. It takes a great deal of perseverance to get to this point, as the repetition of write and then erase signal he has worked through this process of writing and failing in order to get his desired end goal. The structure and form. A Poppy Blooms by Tatsushika Hokusai is a 3-line poem that conforms to the standard pattern of a haiku. In the original Japanese, the first line had 5 syllables, the second line 7, and the third 5 again. The version below
has been translated from the Japanese with an attempt at keeping the lines to around the same syllable numbers. But the result is 6, 6, and 4 syllables. The lines of a poppy blooms do not rhyme, but they are unified through their use of repetition and other literary devices. And then, as a summary of the a poppy blooms, in the first line of a poppy blooms, the speaker begins by acknowledging the repetitive process that marks his writing. It's not a linear process. This means that he doesn't start at the beginning and end up at the end smoothly and without pause. Instead, each process of creation and destruction, he writes and then erases. The second line emphasizes this. The erasing goes on, marking the needs of perseverance and in the face of creative adversity. Eventually, as the third line reveals, he's going to create something that brings beauty and joy to the world. The metaphorical poppy blooms. And let's go back to the line 1, which is the I write, erase, and rewrite. In the first line, the speaker begins by describing his writing process. He writes, erase, and rewrites. This very simple description of his writing is one that will likely hit home with many readers. It describes a wide variety of creative pursuits. One can't expect to create a perfect piece of writing on the first go. Failure is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be accepted as a failure. Instead, it's all part of the process. He writes, erase, and doesn't like the failure to get to him. He picks up the pencil again and rewrites. So the second line, the erase again and then, that's the second line. The second line emphasizes the feelings shared in the first. Now, the speaker erases again. This is yet another step on the journey towards his ideal final product. The second line is enjumbled. This means that the reader, as they did with the first line, has to jump down to the third in order to finish the phrase. This poem moves very quickly. A result of its short line and use of repetition and enjumblement, it should be noted that the example of enjumbment at the end of line 2 is quite effective. And then the word "and then" is the perfect cliffhanger to get the reader prepared and excited for what's next. It is also, once more, evokes the poet's writing process and then the feelings that creativity can bring to one's life. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, something changes. And then in the third line, which is a poppy blooms, that is the third line. A poppy blooms. That change, which was alluded into the second line, is revealed in the world. In the third, I should say. A poppy blooms, the poet concludes. At first, readers might find themselves confused by this sudden shift from writing-related language to natural imagery. But since this is a haiku, and nature imagery is one of the primary subjects, it shouldn't be entirely surprising Tatsushika Hokusai turns to nature to create a metaphor, one that brings his writings process to a beautiful conclusion. So that is the short poem of Tatsushika Hokusai, A Poppy Blooms.